For more than 30 years, I taught boys that you can tell everything you need to know about a man by how he treats the people who can do nothing for him. The morning Beau Castle hooked my car to the back of his truck and laughed at the broke old man standing in the rain. He had no idea he was taking a final exam he had already failed. He thought he was towing a nobody, an old man in an older car, grey and slow and not worth his trouble beyond the cash he could squeeze out of me. He had built a small, mean little kingdom out of exactly that assumption, that the people he preyed on were too tired and too poor to fight back. What he did not know, because he was new in town and had never bothered to learn it, was whose car he had just hooked, and what that name still meant to about 4,000 people who had grown up in Bell County, Georgia. By the end of that week, Beau Castle's whole operation would be finished, and it would not be because I lifted a finger to finish it. This is the story of a young man who failed the only test that ever mattered, in front of a town that had been graded on it for 30 years. My name is Eddie Rourke. People around here call me Coach, and have for so long that some of them, I think, have forgotten it is not my actual first name. I am 55 years old, and last spring I retired after 31 years as the head football coach at Bell County High, which is a long way of saying that for 3 decades I was handed the sons of this town at 14 and given back young men at 18, and the work in between was the whole of my life. I never married. I never had children of my own, not in the way the paperwork means it. I had about 900 of them instead, give or take, and I would not trade that arithmetic for anybody's. I still wear my whistle, the old brass one on a frayed shoelace, even in retirement, even to the pharmacy. 31 years will wear a groove in a man, and I never could find a good reason to take it off. Every grown person in this county knows the exact sound of that whistle. It was the sound that meant practice was starting, or that you had done something foolish and were about to run for it, or that you were about to be told a truth you did not want to hear. I did not blow it that day in the rain, but it was around my neck the whole time, under my collar, and looking back I think it was the only thing on me worth more than the car, and Beau Castle never even saw it. What I do not have is money. A coach's salary in a small county is a coach's salary, and I spent a good deal of mine over the years on cleats for kids who could not afford them and gas to drive boys home who had no other ride. And I do not regret $1 of it. But it means that at 55, I drive a 1996 sedan with 200,000 miles on it and a door that sticks. And I live small, and to a stranger passing through, I look like exactly what Beau Castle took me for, which is an old man the world has used up and set down. Most people have stood on the receiving end of a glance like that, the one that prices you in half a second by your car or your clothes or your years and finds you not worth the bother. If you have, you will recognize what comes next. The whole of this story rests on that one look and on what is really hiding behind it. What Beau Castle saw in that parking lot was a worn-out old man and an easy $250. What he could not see, because he had never bothered to learn the town he was robbing, was the thing that turned his easy money into the worst week of his life. A town like Bell County runs on its high school football the way other places run on church. And for 31 years I was, for better or worse, near the center of it. That is not a brag. In a lot of ways, it is the opposite. It means that the sheriff of this county played free safety for me in 2001. It means the magistrate judge caught passes for me in the 90s. It means the man who owns the largest commercial property company in 3 counties, the one that holds the contracts on half the parking lots in town, was a guard on my offensive line who I personally drove to his college visit because his daddy would not. It means the woman who runs the bank, the fellow who owns the radio station, 2 county commissioners, and about a third of the business owners on the town square all spent 4 years of their lives learning from me. A single idea that I repeated so many times, they could say it in their sleep. It was the only thing I ever really cared whether they remembered. I told them, over and over, that I did not care how they treated the people who could help them. Anybody is decent to the people who can help them. I told them I only ever cared how they treated the people who could do nothing for them at all. Because that, and only that, is the true measure of a man, and the rest is just performance. Beau Castle was about to perform for the wrong town. He had come to Bell County maybe 8 months before, from somewhere else, and he had set up a towing operation, and within a few months people had started to talk, because the talk in a small town is a kind of weather you learn to read. He was a predatory tower, the kind that has turned a service into a shakedown. He worked the lots where he could catch people in technicalities, hooked cars fast, and then made the fee as painful as the law would let him, and sometimes a good deal more than the law allowed. He went after the people least able to argue, the single mothers and the old folks and the kids, because they were the ones who would just pay to make it stop. The first one I had heard about by name was a young mother named Krista, who cleaned rooms at the motel by the interstate. Beau hooked her car while she was inside paying her own water bill, and when she came out with a baby on her hip, he told her it would be $300 cash, or the car stayed. And she did not have $300 cash, because nobody who cleans motel rooms has $300 cash. So she stood in that lot and cried while he filmed her on his phone and told her that crying would not lower the price. She paid it eventually, borrowed it from her sister, and got rides to work in the meantime from people who could barely spare the gas. There were others. An old man on oxygen, a teenager whose first car, bought with 2 summers of mowing money, sat on Beau's lot piling up storage fees until it was cheaper to sign the title over to him than to pay to get it back, which Beau knew, which was the whole design. He never broke a person who could fight him. He only ever broke the ones who could not, which is the oldest and lowest form of strength there is, and it works, for a while, in a place where no one important has yet been on the wrong end of it. I had heard the stories. I did not yet have one of my own. That changed on a wet Tuesday in the lot behind the pharmacy on Main. I had parked there to run into the pharmacy and pick up a prescription. 10 minutes, 15 at the outside, in a lot that has a confusing little sign that Beau had learned to farm like a crop. When I came back out, my old sedan was already up on his hook, tilted at that ugly angle, and Beau Castle was leaning against his truck, waiting for me, with the bored, satisfied look of a man who has done this 1,000 times and enjoys it more each time. I was polite. I have found that politeness costs nothing and tells you a great deal about who you are dealing with, by how they answer it. I told him I had only been a few minutes, that I was a regular at that pharmacy, and asked, reasonably, if he would drop the car and we would call it a misunderstanding. He smiled at me the way you smile at a child who has said something quaint. He told me the car was hooked, and once it was hooked, there was a fee. And the fee was $250, cash, today, or it went to his lot, and the number got bigger every day it sat there. He said it slow and a little loud, the way Beau Castle said everything to anyone with grey hair, as if age were a kind of stupidity he had to talk around. I understood by then how the lot itself worked, because it was not an accident. It was a trap he tended like a garden. The little sign at the entrance was technically legal and practically unreadable. The print small, the wording twisted. The part that mattered turned half away from where you would actually stand to read it. He had learned which lots had signs like that and which businesses would not object. And he sat on them the way a fisherman sits on a good hole. He was not towing cars that caused anyone a problem. There was no one waiting for my spot in the rain. The pharmacy did not want me towed. He was harvesting a technicality off a confusing sign for cash, and he had done it so long without anyone stopping him that he had quit bothering to pretend otherwise. Which is what happens to a certain kind of man when he goes too long without meeting a consequence. He gets careless about the disguise. He starts to believe the thing he says to the people in the lot. But out here, his truck really is the law. Because for 8 months, in the only sense that mattered to a single mother with a baby on her hip. It had been... I told him, calmly, that $250 in cash was not a thing I had in my wallet, and that the law in Georgia did not actually allow him to demand it the way he was demanding it, which I happened to know. And that is when the smile went away, and the other Bo came out, the one the single mothers and the old folks had been meeting for 8 months. He stepped in close, and he got loud, and he told me that out here, his truck was the law, that I could pay him or I could walk home in the rain and watch my junk car rack up storage fees until it was worth less than I owed. And that frankly, he said, looking my sedan up and down, and then looking me up and down the same way, it already looked like about all I was worth. He laughed at his own line. He pulled out his phone and started filming me, narrating to whoever he showed these things to. Look at this old boy trying to lawyer me out of a tow. And he told me to go ahead and cry about it. I did not cry about it. I have been yelled at by angrier men than Bo Castle, by furious fathers in parking lots, and by 18-year-olds with more muscle and less sense than he will ever have. And none of it ever moved me much, because a man who is comfortable with who he is does not catch fire just because someone holds a match to him. So I stood in the rain, and I let him perform. And I did the thing I have done my whole coaching life, which is to watch a young man tell me exactly who he is and file it away to deal with properly later. But I want to be honest about the one moment it nearly got the better of me. And it was not the insult about the car. And it was not the cash. There was a kid watching the whole thing. He was 16, and his name was Tyler. And he worked the register at the gas station that shares that back lot. And he had come out under the awning to watch because Tyler is one of mine in the unofficial way I still have a few of mine, even in retirement. A quiet kid from a hard house who I had been making sure got a hot meal and a ride more often than he knew I was arranging it. Tyler had his own phone out, recording from under the awning, his hands shaking, because he was scared of Bo. Everybody his size was scared of Bo, and he was doing it anyway. And Bo saw him. Bo turned that ugly attention on a 16-year-old boy and told him to put the phone away or he would come over there and put it away for him. And he took a step toward Tyler, and that was the moment something in me came up off the bench. Because I have spent my whole life standing between grown men's tempers and the kids they wanted to take them out on. And there is a version of me, older and harder than the patient one, who was one step from crossing that lot and reminding Bo Castle that some old men were strong once, and remember how. I felt my weight shift. I had 30 years of standing between bullies and boys in my legs. And I held still. And I will tell you exactly why. Because it matters. If I had crossed that lot angry, it would have become a story about 2 men fighting in the rain, and Bo would have had his phone out. And somehow, the way these things go, the old man swinging first would have become the story. Tyler would have been forgotten. The real thing that was happening, which was a grown man menacing a frightened boy for the crime of telling the truth with a camera, would have been buried under my temper. So I did not give it to him. Instead I said, in a voice I made sure was steady and carried, that Tyler should keep recording, that he had every right to, and that he should hold the phone with both hands and get it all. And I looked at Bo and I told him, quiet, that he was on camera now putting his hands toward a minor, and that he should think very hard about his next move. Bo Castle was a bully, and bullies do their arithmetic fast when the odds shift. And he stopped. He spat on the ground, and he told me to enjoy the walk, and he climbed in his truck, and he drove off, with my car still hooked behind it. Tilted and sad in the rain, and Tyler and I stood under that awning and watched my whole week get worse. I should tell you more about Tyler, because he is the heart of this and not a footnote to it. He was 16, and he lived with a mother who loved him and a rotating cast of her boyfriends who mostly did not, in a house where the lights went off sometimes and the refrigerator was a gamble. and he had learned the particular quiet of a kid who decided early not to need anything from anybody, so that nobody could take it away. I knew that quiet. I had coached 100 boys who wore it. For about a year, I had been making sure Tyler ended up on the receiving end of a few accidents. A coach who happened to have an extra sandwich, a ride that happened to be going his way, a winter coat that happened to be the wrong size for the donation bin and might as well go to somebody who could use it. He was too proud to take help and too sharp not to notice it was help. And we had arrived at the unspoken arrangement that lets a proud kid accept kindness, which is that you both agree to call it something else. So when Tyler stood under that awning with his hands shaking and his phone up, recording a man who frightened him, he was not doing it for a stranger. He was doing it for me, and he was risking the only two things he had, which were his safety and the job that kept his lights on. And he did it anyway. I have given a great many speeches about courage over 30 years. I have rarely seen the real article as plainly as I saw it under that gas station awning in the rain. I paid the money the next day. I want you to understand that I did not have some lawyer on speed dial, and I did not make a scene. I walked to Beau's lot on the edge of town, and I paid him the $250 and the extra day's storage he tacked on for spite. In cash, counted out slow, and I took my car home, because I am not a man who confuses his dignity with winning every fight in the moment. Beau grinned the whole time he counted my money. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another tired old Mark who had learned his lesson. He had no earthly idea that the lesson that week was his, and that it had already started, and that I was not the one teaching it. The town was... Because Tyler had posted the video. I did not ask him to, and at first, honestly, I wished he had not, because I do not like being looked at, and I especially do not like being looked at as a man someone got the better of. But Tyler posted it that night. The whole thing. The rain and the hook, and Beau telling a grey-haired man he was worth about as much as his junk car, and then stepping toward a 16-year-old with his fist half up. And here is the thing about a small town, but a man like Beau Castle, who came from somewhere else and never learned the place, could not have known. In a town this size, that video did not travel to strangers. It traveled to family. By morning, it had been watched by half of Bell County, and the half that watched it was not watching a stranger get towed. They were watching Coach. They were watching the man whose name was on the field house, the man who had driven them to college visits and buried their fathers beside them, and stood between them and their own worst nights when they were boys. And every single one of them had learned. On a practice field a long time ago, the one idea I ever really taught. And they were watching a young man fail it in real time, on video, with a smirk. I learned what kind of week Beau was about to have. Not by orchestrating any of it, but by my phone starting to ring and not stopping. The sheriff called me first. A 50-year-old man I still think of as a skinny sophomore, and he was quiet in the particular way he gets when he is angry. And he told me that there had been complaints about Castle towing for months that had never quite added up to enough, and that a clear video of the man threatening a minor and admitting on camera to an illegal cash demand was, in his professional opinion, exactly enough. He did not do anything for me. He was very careful to say that, and I was very careful to hear it, because I did not want anybody bending the law on my account, not even toward a man like Beau. He just did, at last, with evidence in his hand. The job the complaints had been asking him to do all along. The magistrate I caught passes from in the 90s did nothing improper either, but the citations and the consumer complaints that had been gathering dust suddenly had a face and a video attached, and things that move slowly began to move. By then, the town was moving on its own. And it moved in the small, specific ways a town moves. The man who owns the radio station, a tight end I coached in '98, did not editorialize, because that would have been improper. But he did read the public record towing complaint numbers on the morning show 2 days running. Just the facts, just the dates, and let people draw the map themselves. The woman who runs the bank, who I taught to throw a halfway decent spiral at a father-daughter event 20 years ago, mentioned to a county commissioner over coffee that an awful lot of her customers had bounced checks the same week they got towed, and that perhaps somebody ought to look into that. None of it was a campaign. There was no meeting, no petition, no organized thing a lawyer could have pointed at and called a conspiracy. It was just a town full of people who had each, separately, watched a video and felt the same old lessons stir in them at the same hour, and started doing the small things that were theirs to do. That is the part Bo never could have planned around, because it was not an attack. It was a climate. You cannot sue the weather, and you cannot intimidate it, and a man who has spent his life bullying people one at a time has no idea what to do when a whole place quietly decides, all at once, that it is finished with him. And then there was the part no judge and no sheriff had anything to do with. The part that actually finished Bo Castle, which was the property. My old offensive lineman, the one I drove to his college visit, the one who now owns half the commercial lots in 3 counties, watched that video of a stranger humiliating the man who drove him to that visit. And he did not call me, and he did not say a word to anybody. He simply did not renew Castle Towing's contracts on a single one of his lots, and quietly let the other property owners around the square know he had made that decision. And in a town where most of the lots worth towing from are owned by people who learned how to be men in my locker room, Bo Castle's hunting grounds closed one by one in the space of about 4 days. Nobody organized it. Nobody needed to. The town just remembered, all at once, what it had been taught, and acted on it. And a young predator who had built his whole operation on the belief that the weak and the old have no one, looked up one morning to find out that this particular old man had about 4,000 people, and that he had insulted every one of them at once without knowing their names. He came to find me at the end of that week. I will give him this much credit, and it is real credit, that he came in person. He drove out to my little house with the team photos on the walls, and he stood on my porch with his hat in his hands. A different Bo than the one in the lot, deflated, frightened, his whole mean little kingdom collapsing under him. And he tried to apologize. He told me he had not known who I was, and that, right there, was the saddest sentence I have ever heard a young man say, because he meant it as an apology, and he did not understand that it was actually his entire confession. He had not known who I was. That was the whole problem. He had a way of treating people he thought were important, and a different way of treating people he thought were nobody. And he had never once in his life questioned that arrangement. And it had finally cost him everything. And even now, on my porch, the only thing he was sorry about was that he had guessed wrong about which kind I was. I did not slam the door on him. I have never in my life slammed a door on a young man, and I was not going to start at 55, not even for Bo Castle. So I asked him to sit down on the porch step, and I sat down next to him, and I did the thing I have done 10,000 times with boys who broke a rule and broke it badly, which is to tell him the truth without dressing it up and without grinding him into the ground with it. That was also the week I came to understand where a man like Bo Castle comes from. And the understanding took some of the satisfaction out of me, the way the truth tends to. Tyler, of all people, was the one who told me. Because Tyler had grown up 3 streets over from where Bo did, and knew the shape of it. Bo Castle had come up in the foster system, bounced from house to house, a kid nobody ever picked, nobody ever drove anywhere, nobody ever stood between and the world. He had aged out at 18 with a trash bag of clothes and no one, the way too many of them do. And he had learned the only lesson the world had ever bothered to teach him, which was that there are people who matter and people who do not, and that the whole game is making sure you end up in the first group, by standing on the necks of the second. Nobody had ever pulled Bo aside on a practice field and taught him the other thing. Nobody had ever made him run laps for being cruel and then put a hand on his shoulder afterward so he would know the laps were not the same as being thrown away. He was, I realized, sitting on my porch, exactly what happens to the boys who do not get a coach. He was one of mine, who was never mine. And the cruelty he had aimed at me was the cruelty the world had aimed at him first, passed along the only direction he knew how to pass it. It did not excuse a thing he had done. A man is still answerable for the harm he does, no matter the harm that was done to him. And I have buried that lesson into enough hard cases to believe it all the way down. But it changed what I said to him on that step. I did not tell him he was a monster, because he was not one. I told him he had been failed, badly, by people who should have caught him, and that being failed is not a life sentence to fail everyone after you. And that he was 26 years old, which is young enough to learn the thing nobody taught him, but only if he was willing to learn it the hard way. Starting now, by becoming the kind of man who is decent to people who can do nothing for him, especially when no one is filming. I told him the towing was over in this county and that he had earned that and there was no undoing it. But I told him that a man can be finished in a town and not finished as a person. And which of those he became was, for the first time in his life, going to be up to him and not the people who threw him away. What stayed with me afterward was not the dollars or the citations or the slow grinding of the law. It was the rest of what happened on that porch step. Bo Castle left Bell County. I do not know if he became a better man somewhere else, and I will not pretend to you that I do, because the honest truth is that you plant seeds and you rarely get to see which ones come up. But he left without bitterness, which was not nothing. And the last thing he said to me on that porch was that no one had ever talked to him the way I just had. And I believed him. And that is the saddest and most ordinary tragedy I know. That a single afternoon of being treated like he might be worth something was a brand new experience for a grown man. Tyler is the one I can tell you about with certainty, because Tyler I get to keep an eye on. The town that watched that video also watched a 16-year-old boy hold a camera with shaking hands and refuse to look away. And the town remembered that too. My lineman, the one with all the property, gave Tyler a real job. An after-school thing with actual prospects. The kind that turns into a trade and a future for a kid from a hard house. Tyler is going to be all right now. More than all right. Because he did the brave thing in the rain when it would have been so much easier to go back inside the gas station and pretend he saw nothing. The whole of it, the whole reckoning that fell on Bo Castle, started with a scared kid deciding to be brave for 10 seconds. And I would like every 16-year-old who ever feels powerless to know that the bravest thing in the entire story was the one done by the person with the least power in the parking lot. I gave Tyler my whistle, the brass one on the frayed shoelace, the one that was around my neck in the rain. I put it over his head one afternoon at the gas station and told him it did not make him a coach and did not mean he owed me anything, that it only meant somebody had finally decided he was worth handing a thing that mattered to, and that the rest was his to figure out. He has it still. He wears it under his shirt, where people cannot see it, which is exactly where a thing like that belongs. I have turned this over more than once since. The question of whether there was any pleasure in watching that young man's operation fall to pieces. The truthful answer is messier than people want it to be. There was no clean joy in it. Not once I had seen the frightened, unfathered boy under the cruelty. If anything in it warmed me, it bore no resemblance to revenge at all. It was the sight of a whole town, with no meeting and no plan, remembering in a single week what it believed and quietly acting on it. 4,000 people who had once been my boys and girls each decided, on their own, that the measure of a man is how he treats the ones who cannot help him, and refused to do business with a man who had flunked it. I never gave a speech. They gave the speech back to me, all at once, in 4,000 small decisions. And a coach is not handed a finer retirement gift than that. So, I will not ask you the usual thing at the end here. I will ask you this instead. There is, in your life right now, somebody the world has decided is a nobody, a tired clerk, an old man in an old car, a kid holding a mop. Somebody it would cost you nothing to be kind to, and gain you nothing either. They are the whole test. They always were. Be good to them this week, especially when no one is watching and there is nothing in it for you. Because that is the only exam any of us is really taking, and most people never even know they are sitting it. Tell me in the comments about the coach or the teacher or the stranger who taught you that, the one who measured you by the right thing. And the next time somebody decides you are a nobody worth being cruel to, you stand up straight anyway. You never know whose town you are standing in,